Back on Radio Row in Indianapolis at the NFL Combine. Craig Hoffman here for the Hoffman Show with a couple of friends. And I'm very excited to do this, guys, as Ben Solak and Brooke Pryor, the Ringer and ESPN, respectively, are here. Our first annual, our inaugural, if you will, NFL Combine Roundtable. So the idea here is that we're going to toss around a couple of topics. I've got mine picked out. Hopefully you guys either came prepared or are going to trust your whip-smart nature to come up with one in the next
second one.
Whatever couple of minutes here while I throw out mine to start. And we're going to just toss out around the topic. We all come from slightly different perspectives. And so I'm excited to do this. Thanks for doing it.
No, of course. That'd be a good time. It's easier than the usual Combine table talk, which is like 15 minutes about the Colts. You got to try to remember all the Colts players. Like, this is good.
Yeah,
this
especially
is like a pop quiz. Like, I miss that anxiety and adrenaline rush in high school and college when you show up and you're like, what are we going to talk about?
Here we go.
Except now we're going to do it on the radio, which is just even better.
Right. I mean, it is what it is. It's a low-pressure radio show over here. That's for sure. All right, so my first one, I've definitely thought of based off of what Washington is and the team that Brooke covers. For those that don't know, Brooke, the Steelers reporter for ESPN, although of course you also see her on Get Up and other ESPN programs. But it's very simply what makes a good NFL head coach. Because, Brooke, you cover a guy who has never had a losing season, and that's insane because I feel like all I've covered in Washington is losing seasons. And obviously, Commanders just hired Dan Quinn, who is very well regarded as a good coach. TBD as a head coach. So, Brooke, I'll start with you. What makes a good NFL head coach?
You know, I think it goes beyond the X's and O's. To me, a good head coach is not only a good motivator and a good leader in a locker room, but is also good at making personnel decisions, good hiring decisions. Like, to be a head coach in the NFL now, you can't be a micromanager. You need to be able to hire people out to delegate tasks, people that you feel like align in your vision and move the team forward. And I know that, the Steelers and the way that they construct things, the way that Mike Tomlin hires, yes, he's, never had a losing season. That's great. Hasn't had a lot of postseason success recently. Hasn't had a win since 2016. His coaching tree is pretty bare. It's, I would say, barely even planted. There might be like one scraggly root in there. But he has not had a great track record, especially hiring offensive coordinators, offensive guys. And I think that he is a good head coach in a lot of ways. Great, a Hall of Famer. But to me, in the modern NFL and where we are in 2024, in order to be the type of head coach that he wants to be, the motivator, the guy that does get the most out of his players, you have to have that second piece in being able to round out the rest of your staff and get the most out of those guys.
Yeah, I think that I've been thinking a lot recently about the ability to control narrative and the ability to choose what matters and what doesn't. I watched it was a lot of the Arthur Smith experience when he was in Atlanta, some of the Nick Sirianni experience in Philadelphia this past year, where those teams had problems, and then the coaches weren't able to be like, hey, these problems exist. It's a Tuesday. Here's my answer on the problems. We're done talking about this on Wednesday. We're going to the football field on Sunday. We're going to try to win a ball game. Everything became a bigger issue there. Everything kind of elevated there. We talk a lot about what makes the CEO coaches, what makes the Pete Carrolls good and the John Harbaughs and the Mike Tomlins good. A lot of it is knowing what's the forest and what's the trees, knowing what matters and what doesn't, and having the ability to say all right, here's a narrative people are asking about. Here's something that a player about mine tweeted. They said on their freaking podcast on Wednesday. This does not matter. So I'm going to get in, I'm going to get it done, and I'm going to get out. And when a head coach, so much more now than it was 20 years ago. All of your players are on social. All of your players are talking to people. There's so much more media access than there was. You have to be able to keep the ship on the course. And one of the things that I think you see from the young scheme lords who become head coaches, right? All these guys are incredible schemers, X's and O's, is that the thing that they have to learn on the job in the first couple of years, it's what it's like to just stand at the wheel. What's a ship's wheel? It's just a wheel?
It's a wheel, yeah.
I think it's a wheel. Traditionally it's a very large wheel.
Stand at that big wheel, Captain Jack Sparrow it, and just say, we're going this way. And I'm going to do cool scheme stuff on Friday, but right now the objective is to just keep everybody moving in the same direction. It's about putting out fires, it's about de-escalating, about knowing what matters and what doesn't. That's I think that it sounds like PR-y and stupid. That's a really important part to keeping your team focused on the stuff that matters. And Kyle Shanahan's the greatest example of this, because all Kyle does is get furious about little stuff, but he never lets it actually take the team off of the path. He's just I hate this right now. It's very irritating, but we're moving on to the next thing.
Yeah, I almost wonder if the scheme lords, to use your term, don't have time for it, because they're wait, people are talking about what? I got to go, scrub the McVay tape from last week to see if I can steal a play. And there is, like, that's what matters to them, and that's what wins football games. I also happen to, via the Washington tree in the famous 2013 photo, know a couple of these guys, and that's kind of how they think. Like, Sean is wired that way. I don't know Kyle very well, but I obviously know a lot of people that do. I know Kevin pretty well. Like, those guys are pretty wired to just be like, this is what matters, this is what doesn't. They're younger, they grew up or played in some cases in the social media era, and I do think that has a huge like the energy control, if you will, which is why I'm actually excited about Quinn for Washington. Is he's a guy that I think does that very well. He obviously had other shortcomings in Atlanta when it came to replacing Kyle, and they had one good season after, but Sark, downhill it went. But I think that the energy control element, and I think Tomlin's probably great at that.
He's very good at that. I mean, a great example is earlier this season with the blow up with George Pickens.
Which I was texting Brooke about because I was trying to write a story about it. It was so confusing. Where I was like, Brooke, can you explain to me just everything that's happened in the last 2 weeks?
What happened?
Yeah. Right, exactly. And it's a very interesting thing because you do want a coach that is a little bit of everything in that way, and the job list and description gets longer and longer, especially the more that there's social media and you have players' families weighing in and players commenting on Instagram and unfollowing people and all of that. And Mike Tomlin is very good at getting his guys singularly focused. Nobody, to me, rallies a locker room the way that Mike Tomlin does, but when you talk about taking that next step, you also, okay, if that's going to be your job as the head coach, then you need to hire your scheme lords as the coordinators.
Right.
And if you're going to be a scheme lord as a head coach, then you need to hire guys that are, the motivators as your coordinators. You have to have that balance if you yourself can't be everything to everybody. And I think that's really what differentiates a good head coach in 2024.
Yeah, and then once your scheme lord gets hired away to be a head coach for somebody else, you have to identify the second one and the third one and the fourth one. And that's where, like, networks becomes a really big thing. Mm-hmm. I was at Kevin O'Connell's podium today, and he was talking a lot about, like, the virtues of knowing guys versus just evaluating coaches on film. And you don't realize how much these dudes just rely on, like, okay, I know these 19 coaches from when I played and when I was a guppy assistant quarterback's quality control guy, and then those 19 guys know 150 guys. Like, the networks are so important because you have to constantly be trying to find the next dude who can fill that coordinator position, because if you're good at it, you're inherently going to lose those guys, and just the cycle continues and continues and continues.
I mean, that's another one of Kyle's superpowers, is like his ability to hire good defensive coordinators is insane.
Well, we might be reaching the water's edge of it, right? Because you had Solak.
Right. How many in a row do you get?
Right, and then Steve Wilkes, and it's 1 year of Steve Wilkes, and Wilkes kind of wasn't from the incubator. He wasn't a clear connection through that coaching staff, and they move on from him, and now, like, that job's been open for a couple weeks now, right?
Well, I guess it's the last one, so at this point, I guess you can probably poach anybody, but also, how late do you'd probably want to have a coordinator by the time you get here.
Right.
Yes, you very much would, yes.
So what exactly are we evaluating? I don't know. I kind of thought when they fired Wilkes, they might have had someone in the bag waiting, but guess not. Guess not. All right, who wants to go toss something out next?
I can go next.
All right.
The thing that I've been harping on this and been thinking about, and again, another presser reminded me of it, is quarterback mobility. And we have to talk about quarterback. We have to stop talking about quarterback mobility as if it raises the ceiling for players, and instead characterize it as raising the floor, because that's what it actually does. John Harbaugh was up at his podium, and he was asked about quarterback mobility, and he did something I've never seen a coach do at a podium, which is he started kind of proselytizing. He was doing a sermon. He was kind of like, back when we took Lamar, there were some people who got upset. Now, weren't they? And we all had to go mm-hmm. And he was like, seriously, he was like, weren't they? And the media, we were there yes, no, that happened. And he was like, and now I feel like, people would say we were kind of early on that curve, wouldn't they? And we were all like, mm-hmm.
Yes, John.
Somebody give him an amen. My goodness.
It was. I don't know. I don't think he knew he was about to do it, but it kind of started happening. He's like, I guess I'm leaning into the bit. But he was talking about Lamar, and he was asked about the change in quarterback evaluation. And you have, a guy here like Jaden Daniels out of LSU who run and be incredible. You have a Caleb Williams out of USC. You have Anthony Richardson who came out last year. There's so many more guys who are coming out who are dual threat. And the league always says, all these NFL GMs always talk about, it's changing the way we think about quarterbacking, and it's changing our framework of quarterbacking. The definition of quarterback is so much wider than it used to be, because we can bring in these different athletes who play the game in different ways. But inherently, when we see a really high caliber athlete, our mind just goes to ceiling. he's really fast, so big plays, and he's really big and break tackles, so big plays, and the ceiling would be incredible. But what the magic of mobile quarterbacks has really been in the league, and you can look at the way that Lamar has performed, and the way that Jalen Hurts performed, Anthony Richardson last year, a lot of these guys, but the magic has been not their ability to create big plays, but to eliminate negative plays. Because they can manage the pocket, because they can escape the pocket, because they can break a tackle, they're able to convert pressures into not sacks. Pressures become throwaways, which are just like neutral plays, or they become completions or scrambles, which can be positive plays. Like if you look at all of the potential results of a drop back, like an attempted pass, incompletion, a sack, a scramble, by far the highest play by expected points per added per play is the scramble. It is the most valuable play technically, because you're creating positives, you're picking up first downs, but you're also eliminating the negative. Like for immobile quarterbacks, that play is a sack. It is second and 17. It's going to be ending the drive. And so yes, like high ceiling, absolutely, I get it. But there's a reason why like your Baker Mayfields of the world are scrambling more. There's a reason why like your Patrick Mahomes scrambles a lot. Jordan Love, like you have guys who are not even like elite athletes, they're just solid athletes. Like they're more willing to tuck and run than ever before. It's because the scramble is a floor raiser. And so now when we look at Jaden Daniels, we look at Caleb Williams, we want to say high ceiling. We should remember and say emphatically, this trait is a floor-raising capacity for them. It allows them to get out in the field and Tyrod Taylor it. It allows them to get out in the field and Jacoby Brissett it, and do just like Gardner Minshew it. Just do the things where, okay, we can go and pick up 1 or 2 cheap free first downs by just tucking this ball in 3rd and 5. Like that's the difference with quarterback mobility.
So I will flip side you to continue this conversation. I think where we think of pocket presence and the ability to deliver there and execute from the pocket as the floor, that's actually the ceiling raiser. Yep. Like I actually think the inverse is true as well. It's like if you can go out there and run around and create first downs, and you can go out there and create big plays and explosives and eliminate the negative plays by running, the thing that makes you Patrick Mahomes is he can do both. He will murder you from the pocket if you let him, which is part of the reason why sometimes he murders you as a scrambler, because you are so concerned with what he can do as a passer that you open up rushing lanes, which about December 25th-ish, he decides I'm going to start running in those as opposed to just throwing the ball away out of bounds. But that processing speed, and that's why I think like the evaluation of Caleb Williams is so damn hard. He just runs around so much, and it's like, what can you do from the pocket? Mm-hmm. And I also think it's why like J.J. McCarthy is rising up boards, is because while there's not a lot of throws on film for him, there are a lot of NFL throws on film for him. And people are like, oh, that has to happen in the league. I see he can do it. That's cool. Like that's, maybe he actually could be really good at this. So I think like your baseline point is excellent, but I also think like the flip side of how we think about this is also true, bro.
Yep.
You know, I come at it from a perspective of that's why the Steelers drafted Kenny Pickett, because they felt like his floor is higher than everybody else in that class. Ceiling may not be higher, but the floor, he's at least starting at that point. But watching his evolution as a quarterback has been so interesting, because pocket presence was never great for him, but you always felt like he could break the pocket and scramble. And yet the last year he really regressed, and he could not feel pressure. He was scrambling around into sacks. I mean, he got hurt when he bailed out of the pocket and ran right into a D end, and it was just the most maddening thing to watch, because you think, well, they drafted you because the Steelers want mobility. They've had a statue back there for the last couple of years. Obviously been used to have the requisite amount of mobility.
He was a play extender and like a negative play eliminator, because he was so damn big that he could take a sack and throw the ball away at the same time. And you're like, wait, that actually wasn't a sack.
Man.
Exactly. And so the Steelers felt like, okay, you know what? We see the way that the NFL is moving. We want that mobile quarterback. And then it to me shows that is absolutely a big part of the evaluation. But once you draft those guys, you need to have somebody in the building that can then develop them and take them to the next step. And when you don't have that, it shows. And at that point, when your floor starts to drop, that's a major issue. And that just is so many red flags in your evaluation process and everything else.
And it's like we confuse variance with floor and ceiling, right? Like Kenny Pickett doesn't have a lot of variance in his play. That's actually not a good thing, because he's just mediocre to bad at all times, versus a guy like Sam Howell, for instance, that was wildly good at times and wildly bad at times.
Yeah. You also need a designer who understands that quarterback mobility and quarterback scrambles need to be baked into the offense, right? This was a big thing for like when Shane Steichen was the OC of the Eagles. Jalen Hurts Hurts was there, and they would talk about, we have run-pass options and we have run-pass-run options, where like it's an RPO, but also like Jalen knows, like, hey, if you see this, you can just tuck it. Like, we are never in the film room on Tuesday going to be like, why didn't you read it out? Get to the third or the check down. Like, Jalen, if you got space, just go, dude. You're a running back, right? And it changes how you drop the distribution of routes. It changes where you put your receivers, right? Okay, immobile quarterback, let's get a check down here to the left, get a check down here to the right. Mobile quarterback, let's leak the back out, but let's leave the right side open, because our quarterback's right-handed. He's going to see the whole side. So if he sees space there, we don't need to go put a tight end there to go lumber for 6 yards. Just tuck it and go, and the quarterback can do that for us. And so now you have an extra body that you can add to the protection, you can add to the concept, right? And so as we start thinking about scrambling quarterbacks, and we moved from a framework 15, 20 years ago of, when the quarterback scrambles, it means he can't process. When the quarterback scrambles, it means the play didn't work. And now we're in a framework of, we invite the quarterback scramble, we accept it, it's a valuable play. Traditional play designs change slightly to account for that new geometry on the field.
I was going to say, as someone who lives in the film room doing this stuff, like, do you see, for instance, like flat players where in concepts formally you're like, oh, there should be a flat player there, where they just vacate that space in the hopes that there is actual space for the quarterback to get a head start now?
Yeah, and it's never going to be as specific as like, okay, this flat player, and like we manipulate him this way, like unless it's like those Eagles RPRO sort of stuff where it's like very clearly it's like a designed triple option sort of thing. What you'll do is you can just send routes deeper, right? If you just if you're the Chiefs, you just run curls at 12 instead of 10, because now the linebacker's sitting at 10 instead of 8, and so now if Mahomes tucks the ball, he's getting 6 instead of 4. Like that. Yeah, exactly. Again, it changes the geometry of the field. It changes the gravity of the field. So there's that aspect of it, and then the other aspect of it, and this was the thing I did a lot of reporting on before the Chiefs Super Bowl in the hope that it would happen, and then Mahomes was just incredible from the pocket and it never really happened. It changes the way your scramble drill rules work when you have players like Mahomes and Josh Allen and Lamar, Justin Fields and Kyler Murray, like some A-tier, B-tier guys who can just survive for like a year back there. Like, it used to be scramble drill rules were very clear, right? If you're not on the side of the quarterback, get to the side of him. If you're deep, go shallow. If you're shallow, go deep. Like, everybody knows. Now with like these elite quarterbacks, it's like, hey, just run around. like obviously like follow the rules at first, but then like if there's space, right, and quarterbacks are thrown across their body, just go to avoid and just sit there. They'll probably find you. Like we have changed the way the 53 1/3 width of the field works because of the quarterback athleticism we now invite into the league.
I remember talking to Randall Cobb a bunch of years ago, and it was me, my training partner, who was training both Randall and Lorenzo Alexander at the time, and we were talking, the four of us, about scramble stuff. And Zoe was like, "So what do you guys do?" And Randall's just like, "I'm not telling you that."
Yeah.
Like, absolutely not, because like their rules were not the same as everyone else's rules with Aaron, and they had very specific things that they changed. Like, it was basically a second play that just lived for a couple weeks, and then they changed it a couple weeks later when teams figured it out.
Richie James told me a story at camp where they did a scramble drill, and he like followed the regular rules, and then Mahomes called him over and was like, "Hey, why'd you go there?" And Richie's like, "So we were supposed to go." And Mahomes was like, no, go the other way. And Richie was like, "Are you sure?" And Richie was like, "This is not how it's supposed to work, but it's how it works."
Do you know, Pat's like, "Do you know I'm me?"
Right, exactly. They're the Patrick Mahomes rules. They're different. It's a different set of rules. Yep. I think it's so interesting too when you talk about the putting these mobile guys in the right schemes and allowing them to run. And that's why I think, one of the reasons that Pickett didn't take a step forward is we know Matt Canada's offense went horribly bad. It was so vanilla. It was so plain. He did not, even though the stat showed Kenny was much more successful when they were using an RPO. Like, God forbid they do that. And like, no, the line wasn't great, but it wasn't as bad as the play calling would suggest.
And Kenny scrambled a lot at Pitt. Like, he talked and run quite a bit.
He changed the rules with the fake slide. Like,
he's not going
to do that in the NFL, but like, that's a guy that you want to get out on the move, and somehow you have paralyzed him. There's like this paralysis by analysis when he's in the pocket, and it's like he forgot his instincts. And so I think part of the reason why I think he will end up being the Steelers' starting quarterback next year is because they have Arthur Smith, who, I know as someone who was a fantasy manager of both Kyle Pitts and Bijan Robinson, I fell into that trap back-to-back years.
Right.
Could be mixed results, but I do think that Arthur Smith has the skill set and the scheme that can get the most out of a mobile quarterback like that. Just, maybe don't draft Deontay Johnson and Pat Fryermuth and George Pickens this year. Like, maybe wait a year.
Big Darnell Washington year coming up.
Yeah. We'll see, obviously. I don't know. They're going to be active. I don't want to go too far down the Steelers path here, but, like, are they going to be active and looking at a guy like Fields? No. You think? No?
No,
okay.
Gosh, I wish.
That would make too much sense.
It sure would. I
love how everyone's still linking Fields to Atlanta even though Arthur Smith left. And it's like, no, that was the reason. or one of the reasons why that made a lot of sense. That's Brooke Pryor. That's Ben Solak, ESPN and The Ringer, our first annual NFL Combine Roundtable. All right, Brooke, you've had many minutes to think of a question/topic. Wrap us up here.
I think I've got a good one because we've talked quarterbacks, we've talked head coaches. I am interested in the running back situation.
Yes.
We're about a year after all of the Zoom calls, all of the holdouts.
Who could forget?
Yeah, right. Will they tag him? Should they not tag him? What am I going to do? I am interested, though, specifically in not only the future valuation of the position, but what does it do to guys in the pipeline? What does it do to guys in high school and college now that are position fluid, that could play something else? They're the fast, athletic guys, so we've kind of, they feel like, running back's a prestige position. Mm-hmm. That's what I want to play. Will there ever be a running back in the Hall of Fame again from this era? And is that a position that's going to die out, go the way of the fullback because these guys aren't getting paid? Will they end up being, because they're so expendable, does that mean fewer guys want to play it? How do you have a prolonged career? Like the domino effect. And does that make more running backs try to be, everybody wants to be Christian McCaffrey, but does it turn into more guys being in that Christian McCaffrey mold? So that's my question.
Does Derrick Henry count as being from this era?
Because he's going to the Hall of Fame.
I'd
say like
he's like a fringe millennial, Gen whatever
Honestly,
is above millennial.
Let's say like Bijan and beyond.
Yeah.
So like Bijan and then this year's class and the guys that are coming.
If Derrick ends up like the last Hall of Fame back for a long time, I'll honestly feel cool about like that. It's Derrick Henry. Like that feels like appropriate.
It's a high. It's
McCaffrey will get in and he'll be after Henry. But
So McCaffrey's like from this era, probably.
But even then, McCaffrey's very much like the starting point of the new type of running back.
Right.
Like he'll go in as a running back, obviously, but like you could probably put an asterisk and just be like offensive weapon.
His value was so much what he did as a pass catcher.
Player.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that so last year was like, all right, running back value, here we go, and then all those guys got tagged / took 1-year deals that were quasi tags, and now they're all back here on the market, and they're all more banged up than they were. Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley, less productive than they were. Derrick Henry, Tony Pollard, and it's just kind of like, all right, we're going to run this back. The price is going to be 80%. Anybody interested? And teams should be. Like, they're like, if you look at Houston and their dedication to running the football, they're a big, established to run an early downs team. They're working with Damian Pierce and Devin Singletary. That team should go get a Josh Jacobs. It makes sense for them. You look at the Baltimore Ravens and the way that Lamar changes the way a running game works. They should go get a Saquon Barkley and present that athletic issue in the backfield. The Philadelphia Eagles, who always rotating at running back, they have Kellen Moore. Tony Pollard was elite under Kellen Moore. They should go get those players. Like, that makes sense. But no one's going to want to be the first guy to commit and set the price tag and set the figure. No agent's going to want to be the first guy to let his guy sign, and everybody else comes in above him. So there's a little bit of a staring contest. I am certain that the running back, who's one of the 11 players in the offensive field, has some value, and it is better to have a good one than a bad one. I'm positive. It's just it's the staring match nature of it. It's a 32 NFL teams kind of all waiting to see who goes first. That leads to, I think, some of this gridlock that we're at right now.
So I tend to think these things are cyclical, although we will not get back to where it was in the 90s, 80s, when like running the football 50-50 was like actually a thing. I think that...
so excited about it.
I know.
Kicking my mic over.
Yeah, it's all right. She caught it. Look at the hands. First drill of the week.
That's
the
right.
mic catch.
Can't coach that.
But I tend to think they're cyclical in part because of the schematics of it. Like, teams play the pass, they go lighter personnel, they drop more guys in coverage, they have more zone calls, man calls, whatever it is based off of the offense that's in vogue in the moment. And then there's a different weakness, and eventually smart offensive coaches are like, hey, that's good. And I know that the analytics say that passing the ball is more effective, but we'd all agree that, okay, well, if we take that to its extreme, then you should pass the ball 100% of the time. And I think we'd also agree that that's very stupid. That the analytics would then change because the way scheme and analytics marry is something that is still very much being, I think, studied and kind of parsed out and will be ever evolving in the league. And so the running back by nature plays a big part in that, of like, is it just so much more beneficial to have the pass-catching type? Is there a place for an extremely high-level bruising downhill back? I think that is going to, and is starting to come back around. I mean, rushing statistics were way up last year for the first time in a long time. And so I think that, like, to answer the core question, is there going to be a Hall of Famer that is drafted, whether it's Bijan Robinson last year, who is kind of one of these type weapons, or is it someone that's drafted this year in the future? Yes, I think there will be. Will it look like, you're Jerome Bettis?
Not going to be the same season,
right.
No. The same stats.
No.
That's what I think is so interesting, is just looking at how this affects guys in the future. You know, like you always talk about if you have a boy and he's born, you want to make him a lefty so he can be a left-handed pitcher
Right.
and get more money. Like, if the running back valuation goes way down and you're athletic enough to play running back, you're probably athletic enough to also be a linebacker, maybe like a thick DB. Like, there are other things that you can do. So does the running back position then become a smaller talent or lesser talent because these guys that are uber talented fan out and go elsewhere? And then how do offenses adjust to that? I'm just, my mind, my ADHD and my anxiety mind are just going wild at all of the possibilities and trying to, fortune tell in the future, which obviously we can't do, but I just think it's such a fascinating thing. Yes, it is cyclical and there is a staring contest. Eventually someone will have to blink, but what does that mean the game will evolve to?
Well, to talk about the market forces too, ultimately smart teams will exploit inefficiencies. Yeah. And I think that's the agent side of it is like, well, I don't want my guy to be the inefficiency. Like, I'm trying to make it so that my guy's the surplus. He's got to get his check and everyone else can screw off. So that is an interesting part of it, like who blinks first. But I think in a way, like that's what, and I feel like we're just praising Kyle somehow in every question, but like what Kyle and John did with McCaffrey was like, no, we'll spend resources on a running back and it's going to make us a Super Bowl contender.
Look at all the teams that have elite quarterbacks right now. And with Buffalo, they went and got Aaron Kromer from the Rams, the offensive line coach, first-round pick on Osiris Torrens, second-round pick on James Cook. You look at what, the Chiefs did. They spent the money on Creed Humphrey. They went and drafted Creed Humphrey. They spent the money on Joe Tooney. You look at what the top teams do when they talk about their elite quarterbacks and what they have. Always, the first thing the coaches say is like, well, we got to be able to freaking run the football. Because if you can't do it, then your elite quarterback gets neutered by a team that's playing 7-8 guys in zone coverage, sitting 10 yards back and everything, and saying, haha, you have to check the ball down, right? You got to be able to run the football.
But to that point, the guys that they have running the football, there's a lot of value in those late round guys that then have cheap contracts.
That's the problem.
And then you use them up and then you find somebody new. Yeah. I mean, the Steelers are a great example of that they draft Najee Harris in the first round, but then they also find that UDFA guy in Jalen Warren who is crushing it, and suddenly good. I'd say odds are pretty good that Najee Harris gets tagged, but like in free agency, I don't see the Steelers spending money to bring him back, and they'll be able to get Jalen Warren at a discount, and then they'll find another UDFA and bring him in, and it just that's the part of it that, yes, you need to have a good run game, but right now you're able to get a running back for so cheap. They're so expendable and so just like replaceable. It's that part of it is what's interesting.
We can't conflate running back value with running game value. Running game value, very valuable. Running back value, well, they have a lot less control over the quality of a running game than we once believed. And a lot more of that now belongs to the offensive line and the system you run. And so that's why, you want to invest in the running game. And a way to do that is to go get Josh Jacobs and give him money, get Solak and give him money. But a better way to do that is go find you a good guard and then go find you another one, right? And so running game value, running back value, two connected but separate conversations.
So I think that goes back to kind of like if you're a high school kid right now, the problem is there's a surplus of good running backs. It's too easy to find a guy who's decent. And I do still think like elite players can separate. And part of that eliteness might be their versatility. It might be because you could actually be a Hall of Fame level wide receiver, Christian McCaffrey, or you are that much better at running people over, Derrick Henry. But I still kind of think that middle class of running back is going to be kind of what it is now for a while.
You're starting to see this already because there's two separate body types at back. There's your Thunder body type and your Lightning body type. And your Thunder type is still like playing back, 5'10", 5'11", 215, 220, big fella, might go be a linebacker, whatever. The smaller guys, right, your 5'11s, 190s, these are becoming your wide receivers. These are becoming your slot guys. And that's a result in college where college used to not be able to throw the football because there weren't enough good quarterbacks, enough good offensive guys. You had to run it. You had the triple option was everywhere, right? So these 5'11", a $190 speed guys, they were running backs because that was where the touches were. Well, we've gotten so much better at throwing the ball at the college level. Those guys now become slot receivers, and that's why. And you see in a league that trickles up, and you get your Wan'Dale Robinsons, your Calvin Austins, and your Tank Dells, and all these cats in the league. That previously those guys would have strapped an extra 10 to 15 pounds on and been running backs, been gadget players. Now they play slot receiver, and so you've already seen one half of the running back build start to trickle to wide receiver. Now it's that second half, that bigger half, that it's going to start looking into being more linebacker on the defensive side of the ball.
It's Ben Solak from The Ringer. You can read him there. You can also listen to their litany of fine football podcasts, which he is featured on, and Brooke Pryor, ESPN, ESPN.com, covering the Steelers and the entire NFL. This was fun. We'll do it again next year.
Thanks, Greg. Appreciate it.
Happy to be the inaugural class.
Woo!
What's up, kiddos? It's your boy Clinton Yates from ESPN. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980. Tell your mama I said what's up.